Good afternoon. I'm Julie Robotham and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. I'm going to hand you straight over to Professor Jackie Troy, who's going to acknowledge country.
Didgerigur, thank you everybody for being here today. And I'm coming to you from Sydney, and in the language of the Sydney area, I would say Ninari, Nalawangun, Maribadiri, in my case, Gamare, Nurada. So we are meeting here together and we sit down together on the beautiful country, for me, of the Gamare, or for Ian, I think you're on Gadi, and for everybody else on all the countries that you're on. The wisdom of our communities, our elders past and present, and the upcoming elders and younger generation are with us today as we talk together about what to do now that the referendum has been decided. Thank you. Didgerigur.
Thank you, Jackie, for that acknowledgement of country. I'm privileged to work with Professor Pat Dudgeon at the Centre of Best Practice in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention at the University of Western Australia. And I'm joining today alongside my University of Sydney colleagues from Gadigal country. In a moment, I'm going to introduce each panellist and they'll each make some comments that address our theme today, and then they'll come together for a discussion. And after that, we're going to leave time for panellists to address questions from the audience. So please post them by clicking on the Q&A button. You can address questions individually to an individual panelist or to the panel as a whole. And you are able to post your question anonymously if you wish to. I'm going to start by introducing more completely Professor Jacqueline Troy. Jacqueline is a Nyarigu woman from the Snowy Mountains region in New South Wales, and she's the Director of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Research at the University of Sydney. Jackie is a linguist and an anthropologist, and her research work focuses on documenting and reviving Indigenous languages. She's interested in the use of Indigenous research methodologies and community-engaged research practices. Jackie, over to you.
So what would I like to say about how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are experiencing the referendum outcome? Well, for me, for my own community and for my own family, it is like being in a period of sorry business. It's a period of mourning. We were looking forward to being included in the Constitution, to have a voice in the governance of Australia enshrined in our Constitution. There are others who didn't want that to happen, and I do respect their choice. But the difference is, for many of us, that this is like a loss, a personal loss, a loss of something that was a hope and an aspiration. It's like losing a family member or a community member. It's like losing an opportunity before it even had the chance to have any voice. The voice had no voice, and then it was gone. What support will Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? I'm using Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander because it is about us, not broadly Indigenous people worldwide. What support will we need as we come to terms with the results? Many people just don't want to speak about it. They want to be left to digest what's happened and to think about the hurt they're feeling and what can come next, how to engage more widely with Australia again. For myself, I felt like I was looking at people differently. People were looking at me differently, that somehow I was maybe an enemy somebody who, it's actually making me quite emotional talking like this, but this is how it was. It felt like in the lead up to the referendum, there was a lot of traffic on the social media, and also on in the print media and the news media, and just people generally talking, um, that made me feel like a lesser person for wanting to see the yes vote go through. I I felt like somehow I was part of some sort of division of the country, because that's what the no campaign, I still find it hard to think there was even a no campaign, but we're trying to put forward was that somehow we were trying to divide the country, that somehow it became racialized. There's us and them again, something I grew up with as a small child. Went through I was a small child when the last referendum went through. It was a wonderful thing. It was yes, yes, we are now part of the population. Yes, I am a person. I am, not only Aboriginal, but I'm Australian. I'm counted. And even as a small child, that was impressed on me. And there were all these people who became very famous, who weren't Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, who supported us in that referendum. And this time it just felt like an opportunity for everybody to sort of make everybody who don't like us to make fun of us. And that feels very bad. So I guess what support do we need? We need a lot of love and care, and people need respect for how they want to talk about this. When somebody dies in our community, we don't mention their name for a long time. So for some people, not mentioning the referendum may be the best way to get through. What does the voice vote mean for trust, reciprocity, reconciliation into the future? Some people have said there'll now be no reconciliation, no possibility of it. I've never actually, to be honest, felt unreconciled. I feel like I'm part of Australia, and I know many members of my family and my community do. My mother is 95 next month, and she went through a period where her identity was just a kickball. She was coloured, she was othered, she was an abo, she was half caste, she was all those things. And this persisted into my childhood as well. And I feel now it's like Australia has rejected us as a Australia doesn't trust us. Speaking of trust, where's the reciprocity in this, that we're not trusted to be part of governance of this country? I worked for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which was our one real attempt in Australia at Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander governance, and it worked really well, but a government just got rid of it. And in a way, that's what's happened now. A government has just got rid of this opportunity while trying to help us get this opportunity. It's very confusing. What does the voice vote mean for recognition and justice in the future? I hope that it might lead to discussions about another way of doing things, but I hope that it's us still leading those discussions as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, not a white prime minister or an opposition leader, particularly not the opposition leader. I think he has a lot to answer for. I also don't want to see loud Aboriginal voices who are trying to belittle other Aboriginal people in this discussion as well. I would like to see a respectful, a caring discussion, one that's done in the way that we as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do business. We wrap around each other in grief. We don't humbug or belittle other people in our grief. I didn't realise I'd be feeling so grief-stricken talking about this, but I do. So that's my thinking. I still have hope for the future. And I hope that Australia really does actually love and care for us as the Indigenous population of the country. We are part of the wider population. We are with all of you. And I would hope that into the future there's a way forward for all of us together.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for those really powerful insights to start off our webinar today. Going to move now to our Professor Pat Dudgeon, who is the Director of the Centre of Best Practice in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention. And Pat's also a Chief Investigator on an NHMRC Million Minds mission grant called Transforming Indigenous Mental Health and Wellbeing. Pat's a psychologist, and she led the highly influential Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Suicide Prevention Evaluation Project called ATSISPEP, which systematically documented for the first time the role of colonisation and trauma in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders suicide and the importance of Indigenous-led cultural responses in suicide prevention. Over to you, Pat, to give some introductory remarks.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Can you hear me? Is everything okay? Yeah, cool. I'm currently in Perth at a National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, their conference. So I've just come out of a conference, and that's where you could see, I don't know if people saw, but I was racing around with my laptop trying to find a quiet place. So if you do hear the odd banging of doors and whatnot, can't be helped. But thank you, Julie, and thank you, Jackie, for those words. Very profound and very similar to all of us. And we've done the acknowledgement of country, all the different countries for people that might be ringing in. I'm actually on beautiful Noongar Budja, that's in Perth in Western Australia, but my mob are from the Kimberley, from the Bardi people. So I'd like to acknowledge all our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples who are ringing in or zooming in for this webinar, and our non-Indigenous allies as well. That's very important. I'm going to echo a little bit what Jackie's saying, and I guess I thought I was the only one on the Sunday when I had to catch a plane. But going to the airport and looking at everyone, it's been a shock, and our reaction has been a shock too. It's I think that, we knew from the polls that it was highly likely it would be a no, but we were hoping for a miracle. And then when it happened, it has been shocking and much more of a profound impact on us than I would have imagined. I was looking at the crowd thinking, most of these people might have voted no against a simple ask. So, you felt like a little bit apprehensive, but also a bit angry. And so I'm really worried. And I know at that time, my concern was with our youth, how are they going to handle this? And with our allies as well. And I'd probably, in an arrogant way, thought, we've been through this, we can handle it, and we can't. That's, a lot of older Aboriginal people who've really fought for social justice are having the same response. It's been devastating for us. With our young ones, I saw a tweet from a younger Aboriginal person, and he said, Australia has voted against us. They don't want us to be recognised. Where do we go from here? So simple things like that spoke about the alienation and heartache, being rejected in your own country. And we've been here for over 65,000 years, and such a simple ask too. I know there was, people said they're dissecting it all and saying maybe it was too short, or the messaging wasn't clear enough, and we need to, do more cultural responsiveness. And right now, where I said we've spent all our time doing cultural responsiveness, and I don't think my feeling is don't throw good money after bad. But no, of course, we'll continue doing that. But I don't know if it was too short or too long. And I think that if people would have just found out what it was about, all it was an advisory committee in Parliament with no veto power at all. It was pure and simple, but it became this circus, and people didn't take it upon themselves to find out what it was too. So I think there's no excuses for it. And it's been a big setback for us. I know internationally we look like how we should, like a big country of rednecks. You know, same as Donald Trump's America. That's how my colleagues from overseas are saying Australia is being perceived. So it's not only a setback for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's actually a setback for us as a country, because you know, we would have moved forward as a civilized nation, and done such a little thing, and for, you know, whatever reason, it was not done. In fact, it was rejected. So I think that's my concern. I'm worried about the youth, the despair they might feel, whether, you know, our suicide rates are going to increase again, the anger that they'll feel. You know, they're already, you know, many of our youth are alienated from our society. They don't feel that they're a part of it. There's no place for them. And so despite all the other really good things, and that's probably what we have to focus upon, there's some really amazing things happening. But this was such a slap in the face, I suppose, and a slap down. So I'm worried about our youth. And I am worried about our well-being. So we're going to have to invest a lot of our personal resources into ensuring that our well-being is kept safe, and the well-being of our allies as well. So I think that was, even though there was that retreat back and there was that week of silence called, where a lot of people blacked out their Facebook, Twitter or whatever, and I do respect that. I didn't stay silent, but I respected why people wanted to do that. And now it's the time we do have to have the conversations. We do need to listen to how people felt throughout the process, and then we need to steel our resolve and go hard again. But sorry, these doors are slamming behind me. But I'm happy to. I'll leave it at that. I think that it would be good to get the conversation going after Ian has his say. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks again, like Jackie, for sharing some very personal insights, as well as insights from your community. I'm going to introduce now our third panellist, who is Professor Ian Hickey. Ian is co-director of the Sydney University's Brain and Mind Centre. Ian's a psychiatrist and he's a prominent public voice on mental health issues. Ian was an inaugural commissioner of Australia's National Mental Health Commission, overseeing mental health reform, and he was instrumental in the early development of both Headspace and Beyond Blue. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to just say what a privilege it's been to work with both Pat and Jackie, and Pat and particularly Tom Calmer, on many of the key mental health issues that have affected Indigenous Australians. I think, as Jackie and Pat have just emphasised, I mean, this is a period of considerable grief for the nation. I think, as Noel Pearson made clear in a speech he gave the Mental Health Council of Australia back in May, this was never an issue for Indigenous Australians to solve, or for them to have to justify their existence or their place at the heart of this nation. They offered a gift. The issue is always going to be, what did the other 96, 97% who see themselves as a group, what are they really like? This would hold a mirror up to what was their real understanding of the national story and how cohesive are we. When that mirror has been held up, unfortunately, people see things they don't really want to see. They're seeing the long trail of colonialism. They're seeing the long trail of racism. They're seeing the long trail, picking up Jackie's point, of a lack of love or care for Indigenous people being accurately reflected. It is easier for those outside of Australia to see the truth in that, to see the obviousness of that, and the extent to which a large number of people just haven't bothered. Not my problem. What's in it for me? I don't get it. What do those people, the other, want? To see Indigenous people accused of creating the divisiveness that's happened during this process, and there has been a very divisive process, was not driven by Indigenous people. The divisiveness was driven by others, and it has revealed the cracks, or some would say the chasms, in our social connectedness, that the Australian society more broadly is not cohesive. It struggles. what we could have learned from Indigenous people about the mob. I talk to Jackie all the time, not whether I'm okay, whether we're okay, whether we are okay. The collective understanding, the collective identity, when held up to the current Australian population, has been found to be wanting. So it's a really difficult period. I think it is a passionate period of national grief and of national reflection. I was really impressed that Indigenous people did say we're going to have a week of silence to think about this. And what happens next is not the responsibility of Indigenous people. It's a period of serious reflection in the wider nation. What is our national story? What is our national identity? What are we prepared to come to terms with? What are we prepared to see in ourselves? Are we prepared to look in the mirror and see what this whole process has reflected about us as a community and from where we go forward? During that period of grief, I think as in many grief periods, there's a danger that some people become more hopeless about the future. Some people feel more alienated, to pick up Pat's point, that some are more vulnerable, that the supports are not there. So the role of people like myself and many others is to listen, is to provide that support and to assist others to make sure that we do not lose any more people during this period of reflection. The really big issue is, and it's a really big question, can the Australian community stop, put aside the politics of these things, not just move on and say nothing happened, but actually be prepared to look at what has happened and the national failure of collective responsibility that has happened? And how do we respond? What might be the ways forward? Are we prepared to actually listen to what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to say on ways forward, to correcting, to being inclusive, to being actually a more cohesive society? Or is the truth, the reality is that we have not arrived there yet as a nation, and the forces that prey on division, the forces that feed on division, the forces that for short-term political gain exploit division, essentially remain triumphant? It's a really big challenge. I'm tied up in a wider discussion about Australian society. We have all sorts of ideas about mateship and inclusiveness and the lack of class structures and how good we are, a national story, how cohesive we are. Of course, it's a myth. Of course, it's a narrative where all the nasty bits have been removed to make it look homogenized, white, Anglo-Saxon, that never did any harm to anybody. Of course, it's an untrue story. It's something that gives comfort to those who identify with that. It's clearly amongst a lot of our older generations from Anglo-Saxon backgrounds, they find comfort in that story, which was never true, but it's something they identify with. Our role at the moment is to listen and respond and support those who may be in a really tricky place, in a really difficult place during this period of national grieving, and making sure we are all there at a time when we can move on and listen.
Thanks very much, Ian. That's really important thoughts about our national identity and how we move on as a country and heal from what's just taken place. The panelists are going to come together now after those three really potent reflections on the outcome of the referendum and discuss together the issues that have been raised so far and any others that might arise organically through the conversation that they have. Please do keep the questions coming through in the Q&A. We will get to those after about the next 15 minutes or so. And panelists, I am going to leave mainly with you to pick up the points from each other. So I'll be stepping into the background, but first of all, I think just to start things rolling, Jackie, if you would like to respond to anything at all that you have heard from Ian or Pat today, and then over to you, Pat and Ian, to take that conversation forward.
Look, for me, I think I was really hearing what both Pat and Ian were saying about the consequences for the wider public. We're only a very small percentage as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of this country, and we have many, many allies. I think it's more than 6 million people voted yes. And so they're grieving as well. And I suspect that in thinking about this panel, I reflected on the people that voted no. I think probably a lot of people voted no because they were scared, didn't understand, as Ian said, didn't bother to inform themselves. Pat said this as well. So they must all be feeling pretty weird as well, is all I can say. Weird in the true old-fashioned sense of nothing in the world is right, it's unbalanced. And in our traditional ways of doing things in the Aboriginal world, we keep balance, and we have ways to bring back balance. We have things like, a lot of people would know about smoking. You know, in a way, I'd sort of like to smoke the whole of Australia and help except don't start smoking. Tom Calma will smack me, but I mean smoking in our cultural sense, you know, give some relief to people for this kind of quite shocking result, because I think even the no voters are probably reeling from what it really means now and the grief that is out there in our communities. So I worry about the mental health of the whole country. And as Pat said, the entire world is looking at us like we have, you know, a sort of Trump state. It's a whole new concept, isn't it? Do we really want the orange idiot running this country, which is his reach, his way of thinking about the world has permeated this place, which is, you know, it and I also saw it about, Ian, what you were saying, that, you know, we've got this kind of mythology of all being one place that pulls together. We're all mates, whether we're male or female, or other, you know, like that we all support each other. We are the place of a fair go. This is actually what was very clear through this whole process, is that there was nothing about the fair go in this. And the people like yourself, Ian, who stood there holding placards, wearing T-shirts, going to rallies, you know, being our ally, there are a lot of people who probably were after you as well. So I just think there's a kind of viciousness and a bad kind of taste around all of this, and we need to do something. Pat said, you know, cultural something, because we don't want to see people despair. And I particularly don't want to see young people like my own 21-year-old daughter despairing and feeling that there is no way forward as an Aboriginal person. This is the age to be proud of being Aboriginal. And it's been easy to do that for a long time now. So hard for my mother and even for me as a small child. But now but this has changed the game.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm just reflecting on what you've said, and you know, I think the role of our allies are important. I think we did a smoking at UWA, where I work, on the Tuesday, and our VC was there, and he you know, he came to offer us solace, and he said, you know, that the uni would be doubling down, tripling down on their commitment to Indigenous affairs. That made our hearts feel a bit lighter. So I think for allies to come and say they're committed to Indigenous issues is important for us to hear, and so to bring back a bit of a balance, I'd say. And so I'm just reflecting. That's what personally I felt. And I've seen a few organisations put out statements that regardless of the referendum outcome, they are still standing with their commitment towards Indigenous issues, which is important. And I think that we still need to engage in reconciliation processes. But maybe I read on social media, someone said, enough of the sticking the plastic hands into the ground, you know, to show reconciliation. We need to move into accountability reconciliation. So not just, you know, motherhood statements, if you like, but also to be a bit more, you know, pragmatic and committed about it. So maybe accountability, reconciliation is where we need to start moving towards. But you're right. I think that we can't lose sight that that, you know, there's 40% did vote yes. They're our allies, and our good work will continue. That's been my little byline on all the social medias that I've been doing. is that, you know, we will remain strong and our good work will continue.
Can I just pick up, Julie? I think the two things that are really important. One is the point, the responsibility for those who, you know, may have supported the campaign is not just to support the campaign when the campaign was on. Now's the time for serious action, you know, well beyond acknowledgement of country or recognition or those things that have been easy, to those things in the institutions and the ways that we work. It's very true in healthcare. And I think in healthcare, most of the organisations understood the importance of this, that this was not simply symbolic. This had practical implications, and we need to take those practical implications forward in very meaningful ways through the organisations which we work. The other is the reflection in the wider society. It's interesting, both Jackie and Pat's reflection on looking at people differently. I find myself talking to people my age, who are a lot of the people who voted no, who didn't say they voted no, but they did vote no, as to trying to have conversations. What were they thinking? What was the justification? What was the reasoning behind the lack of love and care? Because basically, you know, how does one explain that? How did they come to those terms? Because clearly 40%, you know, are there, but it's still the minority. There's a large chunk of the people who need to act and change our national story and restore our national fabric and work towards national cohesiveness, who either haven't really given it thought or they haven't cared. They've prioritized in some particular way. They've perpetuated some view of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. They've perpetuated some particular ideas that have deep roots, that need to be challenged. So I think the other issue for many of us who are not Indigenous, not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, is those conversations with other people in our communities. I'm part of communities up in the Central Coast of New South Wales, where in one booth where I happen to reside, 70% of people voted yes. But a mile down the road, 39% of people voted yes. That's a discussion we have to be having in that community, in the coffee shops, in the restaurants, on the beach, in the surf club, in the churches, in the communities, as to what happened. What is that thing? That's not the responsibility of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have that conversation. That's our responsibility to have that conversation. What? And it's picking up Paggie's point, and it's a generational issue too. Most of the younger people I know who are not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are going, what are people of your age thinking, Dad? Like, what is going on here? Where did this come from? So I think there is a hopefulness that is much more obvious in younger populations. But there's a huge part of our national story in decision makers, in key others, where we have a responsibility to have those conversations. The voting might be over. The conversations can't end.
Can I just say that there are so many young people now who I think are completely confused about how the attitudes that were expressed about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the negativity, you know, the idea that somehow it would be a fearsome thing to have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a voice, have a committee. I mean, like, everybody else has got a committee, but we can't have one. So, you know, it's a real, because my daughter hasn't grown up with the kind of extreme racism that my mother particularly experienced, and I experienced as well. But, you know, there's still awful, shocking, terrible things that are happening to all of us all the time as well. But it's for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people now, it is a better, more hopeful place. And as I said, it's easier to hold your head up and be proud of being Aboriginal, because there are actually laws that prevent people from vilifying you, and you can't be bashed. Well, you can be bashed for being Aboriginal, but if you are, usually somebody does something about it. There are a lot of huge issues still around how we're policed, but overall it's a safer place. So this was kind of like a collective shot at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people generally. It was the campaigning that was so nasty, and turning Aboriginal people against Aboriginal people. It's just like a reinvigoration of the old black police, you know, bring people from one area into another area and get them to hunt you down because they haven't got the same commitment. It's not like that. We aren't like that. You know, this is just mythologizing about, using Aboriginal people against each other, that divide and conquer idea. It's just wrong. I mean, imagine if this was done to non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia. Right, we're going to get everybody with the old blue-eyed, brown-eyed thing. There's going to have a campaign. Are blue-eyed people going to be allowed to hold office anywhere? Okay, and the brown eyes get to say something about that. That's, that kind of campaign, people would say that's ridiculous. Well, that's how I feel about the constitutional referendum, is that it's ridiculous that people would say no. Like, why wouldn't you want Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people to have a voice? It's just so, it seems so wrong. As Pat said, it's such a small thing. It wasn't even a big thing. It wasn't like bringing some new arm to government. It was just doing what a whole lot of other parts of Australia have already got, a voice into government. And we need that. We need to go forward with that in our hearts.
Thanks very much, Jackie, and thanks to the panellists for that warm, open-spirited conversation, which really takes the first opening comments on quite some distance. We have 33 questions in the chat, and people are very energized by those the things that the panelists have said so far. We're obviously not going to be able to get through 33, but let's try and get through 4 or 5 questions in the time that we have available. I would just like to point people towards the chat, where we have listings for helplines. We know that a lot of what we're discussing today is very distressing for people, and we do urge you to reach out if you need support. There are Aboriginal specific helplines in there and mainstream ones as well. I'm going to pick just a couple. The first question I'm going to choose, Pat, I think is probably going to go to you first, because you had mentioned your concern for young people. This is a theme which has been echoed a number of times in the questions, but this particular commentator who's come in anonymously has said, I'd like to hear from the panel on what messaging they would like to hear from school and education system leaders in terms of support for Aboriginal students and staff. Would you like to go for that one first, Pat? And then anybody else who wants to add is very welcome to.
Yeah, look, I think that there's a big role that schools can play, and I'm assuming that schools are already teaching Indigenous studies and observing the cultural activities like NAIDOC Week and so on. So I think schools can just say, without becoming overtly political, about how important Indigenous culture and people are, so they can certainly do that messaging and ensure that they maybe fast track their cultural activities and ensure that these happen. So I think that they have an important role.
Thank you, Pat. Ian or Jackie, anything additional on that question of schools, and if we can broaden that out to young people in general, what do they need to hear at this stage from our leaders and from education leaders?
Well, I think we're lucky that most schools in Australia, particularly in the public sector, are very strong on the importance of Aboriginal culture and contribution. Most young people have much more exposure to that than previous generations. I hope there's no backing off in that. This referendum has nothing to do with backing off from that. If anything, of course, what it needs is to be further emphasised. And what it really reveals, it needs to be further explained. It needs to go to further depth about the genuine history, over 65,000 years, not over the last 200, of this country and of this continent. So I think schools are one of the really positive influences in our country in presenting over the last 2 decades a much more accurate picture. But at this time, not backing off at all. There have been some unfortunate things, I think, in the wider media about backing off on acknowledgement of country or backing off the emphasis of Indigenous culture. This is the time, and I think schools are great. Most school teachers are the most fabulous people. Just go hard, just do it, just go what you've been doing, and perhaps more overtly in partnership with people who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, more overtly having those voices express those views and the depth of that culture, so that if anything, it's amplified right at the moment for young people, and those who identify as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander clearly see that.
Yeah, look, like Pat said, it's time for very serious action. And I'd like to see the tertiary sector, all the universities that bravely put up, we support a yes vote. Good. Make sure that in your own governance, if we don't have it in the Constitution, in your own governance, you have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice in your own institution at the highest level, on the governing committees for our institutions, because then you can have that voice coming through that will ensure that our students actually hear this message, that in some ways, the most powerful institutions in Australia, the universities, really are very powerful, back the idea of having a very public voice that's from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into the governance of those institutions.
Thank you, Jackie, and thanks, Ian and Pat. I'm going to read a comment here first, and then I'm going to follow with a question from somebody else. The comment is from Fiona Sullivan. Fiona says, everyone I know who voted yes is devastated, not just Aboriginal people. There is indeed a lot of love for you, and we feel shame and anger that the rest of the country are so short-sighted. There are other comments in a similar tone, but I think Fiona expresses that very well. From Sue Yates, and following up along the same theme, really, how can we be allies for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues as we recover from this huge disappointment? Open-ended question. Who prefers to pick that up?
Well, can I just say, you've just done it. That's a good action. You want to be with us. Good. You're with us. Accepted. Gratefully.
I think that Ian had addressed it a little bit. I mean, again, ensure there's Indigenous leadership in everything. But also I noticed that I occasionally put posts up there. We've got Facebook posts for Australians for Yes after the referendum. So I think that people have been able to go there and get support, express their hurt as well. Again, join in, reaffirm your support, either personally or organisationally, and be with Aboriginal people. If they are a bit apprehensive or a bit not as enthusiastic, give them time to settle down. Because some different people are going through. One of the things we recognise is that this is a grieving process, and different people will process it differently. So just be sensitive, but also recognising your own hurt in there too. We can't deny that. And as I said, my immediate thoughts after it was obvious it was to our youth and then to our allies. So it's not that people, Indigenous people, don't care. We care very deeply, but we're processing. Some of us might be processing our own feelings as well.
Thank you, Pat. Ian, anything further to add on that one from you?
Well, I just want to pick, because I think this is an issue about what people do feel. I must say my immediate response was to the title of Xavier Herbert's famous book, Poor Fellow My Country, immediately came into my own head. What is my own country? And I just reflect one of the things that Paul Campbell's put up here, now what? What do we do next? And I think our traditional response to this is, okay, that failed. What do we do next? I get on the front foot, and I find myself kind of going, hang on a sec, I got to think more deeply about this, and I got to consult more with people like Pat and Jack, and I've been asking other people close to me who are Indigenous, Aboriginal, Torres Strait, what before we just jump to the next action, because an action's important. There is a grieving thing, but there's also a reflective kind of period here for the whole country, and particularly for those of us, who just intrinsically kind of think, oh, of course we support that. There's a kind of deeper reflection to be had here. There's a sort of catastrophic national failure behind this in identity. and we need to reflect about that. So I think, you know, there's a discourse to be had here. So yeah, we have to do certain things to protect people right now. We have to take actions to make sure that no one is further harmed. But there's also a deeper reflection, like, where are we really? And I think we need to hear more from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders about their reflections about the wider country and about the wider history, and what has not been sufficient, where action has not been taken. That, you know, a lot of the stuff that's happened has been pretty superficial, and a lot of stuff that's deep is there. And in parts of the country, it's very deep. There are clearly, and with across the country, there are just really within different communities. It's not as simple as cities versus countries. It's not as simple as, you know, different parts, states versus states. Within every community, there are really deep issues. And so I think there's a period of national reflection required, which is not to suspend action. In those areas, we can take action, I think, to answer Paul's question. In health, in closing the gap, in institutional issues, I like the idea of the voice. There's stuff to be done. But there's also a deeper period of reflection, like, where are we really at? Because this matters to the cohesiveness and the mental health and well-being of all of us going forward.
Thanks, Ian. We've got a number of comments and questions online about social media and misinformation and disinformation. I'm just going to read part of a comment from Alison Best. She says simply, social media has been brutal. She's worried about the comments that have been made about getting rid of welcome and acknowledgement of country and Australia Day and all of the things that we know and which are so traumatic and damaging to Aboriginal people. She's asking what we can do as individuals to make changes among the 67% who are obviously racist or at least ignorant and uncaring. And if we can just broaden that out more generally, do you think, based on the experience that we've just been through, that there is a role for any further action in terms of how we view in this country disinformation, misinformation, and how social media might contribute to that?
Can I just say it's been very handy to find out who those people are and block them. And there's been one of the, I guess, lighter moments before the referendum was, you know, a lot of people have outed themselves. So we do also know, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who to avoid. But I was overwhelmed with just how much vitriol there was. It was extraordinary. And also people coming in internationally who were clearly from like extreme far right groups or individuals who are frankly dangerous. So, you know, we need allies to look after us. My sign, vote yes, was stolen off my fence, and my next door neighbour's sign on the day of the poll. It was there until that day, and it was very securely tied on. So somebody in this area that I live in, where actually was mostly a yes vote as well, and it was I just was shocked. And there was this huge, there were people who were really actively trying, quite almost violently, to stop people voting yes. So I'm a bit worried about the potential violence, attacks against people. It's the social media whips that up. I've been the victim of it. I imagine, Pat, you have as well. It's just anybody who puts anything up that people object to, people now seem to think that it's open slather. And you have all these other people following up. So maybe the world needs to start blocking those people and just not giving them oxygen. Oh, Pat, can't hear you.
Hang on, unmute. No, I agree. I'm a bit shocked at LinkedIn, which I consider a civilized platform. We're used to getting the racist comments on Twitter and even Facebook. There's a bit of that happens, but on LinkedIn, there's been these people who come onto my post because I'm posting, you know, what a tragedy it has been and so on. And they jump onto my post and then ask innocent questions initially, and then when you challenge them, then they get really nasty and start saying you're a disgrace and blah blah blah. And I go, no, you're the disgrace. Don't come onto my post. Go find your own platform, you know. But it doesn't take long for them to descend into a racist narrative and misinformation. I haven't. I took screenshots of all the most recent one, and I will make that anonymous and probably use it either in a paper or a lecture. So it's good fodder for examples of racism. But I was shocked that it happened on LinkedIn, because normally that's quite, civilized. But it seems that once one starts, another comes in as well. So that's what we're seeing is heightened racism. From here on, I'll probably just I don't know whether it's worth engaging with them. They're trying to point score and have an intellectual discussion to I don't know, to validate their no votes in a sense. But, that's on them. They have to go that path alone or join in with other no voters. I'm not going to give them absolution. But I will delete and block in future, though, because, no point in giving it oxygen.
Can I make the comment, Julie? I mean, this is really important because obviously the amplification of hate through social media is a huge problem in our wider world on all sorts of issues, including this issue. But it is amplification of a small number. So I think that engaging with that and making that the central issue is not approach. It's a distraction. It's detrimental. What we have to engage with is those who actually aren't speaking, who have not actually engaged. They're not there, not those expressing the ridiculous, the hate bit, and say, hang on a second, let's face the reality. 60% of Australians voted no. Within that, I think there's a kind of 40% who are not hateful or racist, didn't care, did not express, pick up Jackie's point, the love and care. It's that group we've got to engage with. And they are private conversations, they're family conversations, they're community conversations. The social media world is an artificial world, and now one that's amplified and politicized and financed and backed by a lot of bad forces. That's not really what communities are about. I mean, my concern is with those who don't post but think or didn't care. That's the conversation of trying to understand, were they really afraid? What were they really afraid of? Did they just not bother? What attitudes do they really hold? What could possibly have been lost? What opportunity did we just pass up? This most generous gift of Indigenous people from the statement from the heart. What did we just pass up? How did we come to do that? And I think when it started out, when the Prime Minister originally discussed this, there was clearly more than 60% of people go, oh, fair enough. That's fairly, isn't that blindingly obvious? Let's just get on with it. Where's that 60%, which is 70% probably, if we could have had a genuine, emotional and connecting conversation that we didn't have. That's the bit I think we've got to find in the next little while, and find ways to have those personal, family, community, local conversations to refine where that 60 or 70% of people really were, which would hopefully reflect what our nation really is.
Thank you, Ian. And I think that's Ian's point, and it's really picking up on Jackie's point and Pat's, is a really powerful call to action for everyone on this call today. And so at this stage, I'm going to wrap up the Q&A because we are coming towards the end of the hour. I'm going to...
Getting warmed up. And I like where, I'll just say a last point, because I think I like where you were going, Ian, and I think once we get over our hurt, I think we'll be more in a situation where we'll say we do need to keep on educating people. It just is a shame that, that it's turned out how it does. And I've been reading the comments too, and I would have loved to reply to all of them. And maybe what we need to do is start another webinar as well, I'm hoping lots of conversations like this will take place. So maybe we do the next one with us four again. So I feel that we didn't quite get to all those questions, and maybe we'll also feel differently in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks, Pat. And Pat is right. The questions are an absolutely rich resource. We've had more than 50 questions from the audience, and that's from a group of 200 people, more than 200 people who've joined us tonight. And that was after a webinar, which was organised at very short notice to respond to the distress that Pat and Jackie and others are seeing in their communities. Thank you, Pat, for that wrap-up statement. I'm also going to ask Ian and Jackie if they would like to make a final comment, a final statement for people just to take away with them out of the webinar room today before we move towards closing the meeting. Ian?
I'd like to pick up with Pat, your point. There are over 200 people on this call. It's very early in this particular process. So I'm not saying, I don't like the idea you wake up on Sunday morning and say, right, the nation's divided, we just move on. I think we just got to reflect and to come back to this on multiple occasions. There's a grieving process for all of us to be taking place, most acutely for those, who feel it most directly as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we need to continue with that, but to take solace in the fact that 200 people at very short notice would come together, that constitutes a community that does care and needs to find ways of expressing that collectively and then practically. But the really important issue of holding on to, and I think Pat's and Jackie's leadership here, got to support the people who are most at risk right at the moment. And for them to know their own peoples, their own communities are there, and we need to support that.
Thanks, Ian. Jackie, what would you like people to take away with them?
Oh, well, I'd like to take away all the questions and think about them. They're really good, I agree. And I just saw one from a colleague of mine about what this means for how people think about us as, I guess, the original landholders of this country. And how do the Yes campaigners now, how they're going to support us to go forward with that positive message. We positively care about not only people in this country, but the land itself. And this is something that young people are passionate about, is, they're inheriting the climate change that previous generations have inflicted on the earth. And this kind of social attitudinal change, it wasn't a change. It was actually a retro back to something, as I said, that was the nightmare of particularly my mother's childhood, but mine. So this is like nearly 100 years of living memory of these kinds of terrible attitudes towards Aboriginal people, that somehow we are subversive, that we are destructive, obstructive, that we shouldn't really be given a voice, and we should all be sort of kept in a box separately, or we will cause great damage. In some ways, that's a message from this event, is that, we are kind of catastrophic in our own country. No, actually, we know a lot about caring for it and about caring for each other, and we know how to deal with trauma. And so, I think, we do know how to care for each other, and we're going through terrible trauma. And I extend the hand to all these people in the questions in the chat who've said, what do we do as allies? You have my hand, you have Pat's clearly, and Ian's, and others who want to go forward positively, and not only about a voice, but also about how this country is going to survive into the next millennia. Even it's at the moment, it's looking pretty dire, and it's the youth of this country who have answers and who have these wonderful open minds that I don't think are tainted with all this stuff that's come up that is of the past. And I find it disturbing that there were young people used in the campaign, like Jacinta Price, to sell a pup, really, sell a bad story.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks all panelists for those final notes, which focus very much on community and caring and hope for the future through youth. We will be publishing online the video of this webinar. So that's going to happen, and you will get that via an email if you signed up and registered for the event. We want to thank our teams at the Brain and Mind Centre and at the Centre of Best Practice for putting this event together very quickly. And I'm sure that I speak not only for myself, but for everybody who's online today in offering our particular thanks to Pat and Jackie and Ian for opening their thoughts, their minds, their hearts to this conversation at such a difficult time. Thank you all. I'm going to now hand back to you, Jackie Troy, to close the meeting. And yes, Jackie.
Yeah, look, thank you all for being part of the discussion today. And I really appreciate having the chance to talk to my great friends and colleagues, Pat and Ian. So as I close the meeting, I do wish you all strength and support at this difficult time. And please reach out for help if you need it. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, there's the 13 yarn service, and Lifeline is always available on 131114. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting with you again in the future.